This section of week 4 of the writing bootcamp focuses on movements, turns, and acts. Now, each story has a particular movement, and this can be thought of very simply as the movement of the plot in many cases. So stories may start from a place of goodness and move to a place of ill fortune and then return to a place of goodness at the end. This is probably the most common kind of story that you're going to see, but overall, every story, no matter how it varies, is going to have some kind of movement, things that happen overall, the changes that take place throughout the story to make it a story. So some of the kinds of stories that you're going to see and the movements that you're going to see in particular stories will depend on the genre or the kind of writing that you are doing. So particular genres will have particular kinds of movements. And just as a few examples, thrillers will have a different kind of movement than a hero's journey versus a book that's written in romance. So you can also compare movements in literature and in writing to movements in a symphony. So you can imagine the way that a symphony may have parts that are quieter and parts that are louder, and then parts that bring in different instruments or different elements of music, such that the overall symphony has distinct things happening in it, different parts that come together to form this whole movement. There's some good description of these movements as well in the resource sheet from this week that Erica has put together, so please take a look at that. Now, I just want to pause and show a few minutes of a video by a great writer, Kurt Vonnegut, about the shape of stories, because he does a really good job here in this video of illustrating what I mean by movements. So just bear with me while I get out to our video here. Vonnegut on the shape of stories.
Created a body of work of startling eccentricity and universal appeal. His singular view of the world applies not just to his stories and characters, but to some of his theories as well.
Well, there's no reason why the simple shapes of stories can't be fed into computers. They are beautiful shapes. This is the GI axis, good fortune, ill fortune. Sickness and poverty down here, wealth and boisterous good health up there. Here's the very middle. Now, this is the BE axis. B stands for beginning. E stands for electricity. Now, this is an exercise in relativity, really. The shape of the curves is what matters and not their origins. So we'll start a little above average. Is why get a depressing person? We'll start the whole thing. We call this story Man in Hole, but it needn't be about a man, and it needn't be about somebody getting into a hole. But it's just a good way to remember it. Somebody gets into trouble, gets out of it again. People love that story. They never get sick of it. All right, not copyrighted. Another story, also a beautiful curve and easily fed into a computer, called Boy Gets Girl, but it needn't be that. Just a way to remember it. Start on an average day, average person, not expecting anything to happen a day like any other. Find something wonderful, just loves it. Oh, God damn it. Got it back again. People like that. Now, these are beautiful curves, and this gets a little complicated. Computers can now play chess, so I don't know why they can't digest this very difficult curve I'm going to draw for you now. And it so happens that this is the most popular story in our civilization, Western civilization. As we love to hear this story, every time it's retold, somebody makes another $1 million. You're welcome to do it. Now, surprisingly enough, enough. I've said it's depressing. You know, people don't like stories about below average days and people. But we're going to start way down here. Worse than that, who is so low? It's a little girl. What's happened? Her mother has died. Her father has remarried a vile-tempered, ugly woman with two nasty daughters, big daughters. You've heard it. See? Anyway, there's a party at the palace that night. She can't go. She has to help everybody else get ready. She has to stay home. Now, does she sink lower? No. She's a staunch little girl, and she has had the maximum whack from fate, which is the loss of her mother. She can't go any lower than that. Okay, so the fairy godmother comes. Gives her shoes, gives her stocking, gives her mascara. Gives her means of transportation. Goes to the party. Dances with the prince, has a swell time. Boring, 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 boring. Now, there's a slight inclination to that line as I've drawn it because it takes perhaps 20 seconds, 30 seconds for a grandfather clock to strike 12. Does she wind up at the same level? Of course not. She will remember that dance for the rest of her life. Now, she poops along on this level till the prince comes, the shoe fits. She achieves off-scale happiness.
All right. This great video by Vonnegut, I think, is a really good representation of what we're talking about here when we look at movements. So what he's looked at here are just a few silly examples of the ways that story movements can be graphed onto paper. Other things that we're seeing in stories, and especially in particular scenes and chapters of books, is turns. Okay, so within every scene, there must be a turn or something that happens to complicate matters, or sometimes a complication is resolved. So each scene, each chapter, everything needs to turn or needs to evolve, change. Something happens in each and every scene. Added on top of this, then, we also have another broad kind of category that we might call acts. So if overall story is a movement, then the acts are the bits or the tripartite or whatever kind of divisions that you're going to see in the overall movement. So in the silly examples that we've just seen from Vonnegut, the rising action of, the conflict being resolved with Cinderella and meeting, Prince Charming could be thought of as an act. The falling action that precedes it, where we see this character transformed back into her old self, after the magic has worn off at midnight, as being another one of these major acts. And so we just point out these movements, turns, and acts as another example of conventions and of things that readers expect in books, and indeed things that readers can expect in your nonfiction books as well. Even though movements, turns, acts are more clearly visible in fiction writing, we ought to be thinking about our nonfiction writing in this way also. So if movements, turns, acts are something you'd like to speak to me more about, let's talk about it in our meeting this week or over email.